Welcome back to our Change interview series, where I interview people who have made or faced major life changes and survived them and navigated them. So they can share their story, how they navigated these changes in order to encourage and inspire each of you who may go through similar situations. My guest today is Susie Mierzwik, and she has an incredible story to share. And I think there are several changes in her story. She is a best-selling author, a speaker, and entrepreneur. And formerly, she has been a teacher and has retired from this profession and then started a business where she helps clients to elevate their health and wellness with phototherapy patches, about which she is going to uh, tell us a little bit more later on. And yeah, this has helped her to eliminate problems she herself had, health problems. And one of the books she has written several chapters in collaborative volumes, and she has also written her memoirs and published them. And the book is called Sow in Tears, Reap in Joy, and it's been published in 2022 and is available on Amazon as an ebook and as a paperback book. And yeah, welcome, Susie.
Thank you so much, Dr. Susanne. I'm so happy to be here on your platform.
We also share a very similar name, I have found.
Yes. Well, how could it not be a good connection?
Probably your birth name is Susan, I
Susan,
think.
Susan,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And my name is Susanne, which is the German form of Susan. So, okay, Susie, would you tell us a bit about your life journey, which you have laid down in your memoirs? Because I think that is really interesting for our viewers and listeners to learn about all the challenges you have overcome. I think that was a really huge achievement already when you grew up and grew out of your origin family.
Yes. So anyway, Susanne, I grew up in the 1950s, and at that time, at least where I grew up, children were to be seen and not heard. So I felt very much like a little mushroom. Nobody paid any attention. I was the oldest of four children, and we were all like little soldiers in a box, all traveling together, wearing the same uniform, going to the same school, going to the same music lessons, and all treated as a unit. I didn't feel like I had any voice. Nobody cared if I had any opinions, if I was never given any choices, and basically kept under the radar. Now, that doesn't sound like a very traumatic situation. However, when I grew up, I had the incredible desire to escape from this anonymity and the feeling of not having any self. I just felt invisible, like I was a little head on a body with nothing inside. I remember feeling very sad as a child, but those were the days when no one really cared about children's feelings. We were just told to be quiet, don't ask questions, stay under the radar, and don't bother anybody. So I did go away to college. I found out that there was a opportunity to be an exchange student on the opposite side of the US, and I eagerly did that. Well, the last week of school, I met a young guy who was going to the military to be a pilot. Now I thought I had the winning ticket because I actually thought to myself on the way back home in the airplane, do I want to marry the postman and live behind the post office all my life? Or do I want to marry a military pilot and see the world? So I naively latched on to that experience as the winning ticket out of anonymity and feeling faceless and voiceless. So after an interval of finishing college, the whole relationship was done on the landline and on snail mail. So you can imagine there was limited ways of communicating, not like today when we can talk to each other in real time across the globe.
Like right now.
Just like that. But back then it was very, very difficult to communicate. So we did get married a year after I graduated from college. At the beginning, it was fine. You know, there's usually not any challenges when you're in the golden era. But then when the children came, he was now flying around the world. He was seeing the world. I wasn't. But when he came back, it was very, very difficult. He would go between the persona of Santa Claus, St. Nicholas, coming back and doling out presents to me and the girls. And then the other half was the authoritarian military husband who wanted to enforce order in the household that had run amok in his absence. So this created quite a challenge. I was not used to be able to speak up because I had been raised under the radar, not knowing what my rights were. If I had any feelings, I was never allowed to voice any. And I had a lot of difficulty even feeling that I had any emotions at all. But mostly it was kept under the radar. So I felt sad. If I brought it to him when he came back, he would say, "Oh, you're having a nervous breakdown." Well, with that kind of a response, I wasn't able to explain how I felt, which was lonely. We were far away from both sides of the family. We had no support. And just one little anecdote I like to share from the early years. When we had our first child, I was very sick in the hospital for 3 weeks after she was born. We did not have any family nearby. The military would give him no time off at all. So I was beside myself. I didn't know what to do. I had a newborn, no one to take care of her, and I was hospitalized. So my response was to pray. I said, "God, you know what? There's nothing I can do. There's no resources that I have available to me. Help me." So someone came from the military background that I didn't even know, came into my life and volunteered to take care of our newborn for 3 weeks while I was hospitalized. Well, this was an amazing, amazing occurrence because this is the first time somebody had offered to help me. I had no family and his family was far away, but then I knew God is going to help me. So that's something that I kept in the back of my mind, which helped me to navigate through many, many difficult years.
Yeah, that sounds really like a miracle, actually, because when nobody's around who is would usually be taking care of you and the child, and you are in such a it's actually a desperate situation, and then someone just shows up. So that's I think that's really it's a miraculous thing. So I
Yes,
think that can really change something inside you.
yes,
Um,
that's it.
I have a question before we continue, because you also use this metaphor of you said you and your siblings were like little soldiers in a box. So it's also a kind of a military metaphor. Or,
Yeah.
did you have any relations to the military from your family of origin before, or came that with your husband?
Well, my mother actually was in the Navy during World War II.
Uh-huh.
So we were brought up in a very rigid system.
Mm-hmm. I understand. Yes, I mean I know people, I or have known people and still know people who have been brought up in military families in various countries, and it seems to be always very similar. For what I heard, that there's a yeah a lot of struggle with the fact that the parent that was in the military tends to bring the attitude from the military back home, and then kind of puts that on the family, or uses that on the family, which is not exactly perfect for children, I would assume.
That's true. So it was like being in a garden where you were not able to quite flourish.
Mm, mm.
And
Yeah, I understand.
we had the sense that we had to make sure mom was not upset. We had to make sure everything was kept smooth under the radar. Nothing could upset mom. We had to give her extra presents. We had to apologize if she was upset. And this was the thing that seemed strange to me. As I was growing up, I wondered, why do we always have to apologize to mom? And then as I grew up later and later and later, I learned that this was a dysfunctional situation. But when you're a child, you just assume that the whole world is like that. So that when I went away to college, and that was my first experience of being away from my family, the thing I noticed was that other families were playful, uh, gave each other a lot of jokes and humor and playing around and kidding. But we didn't have any of that. It was like,
Uh-huh.
as a matter of fact, anything negative, as I said, was kept under the carpet. So I had kept a journal ever since I was in third grade. And I think that this was a survival mechanism, although I didn't know that at the time. And I would record my feelings. I remember when I was 12 years old, my grandma died, and I wrote in my journal, Nanny died, can't go to the football game this weekend. And that was it. So in our family, when somebody died, they just disappeared off the stage like you had a hook, and they were never seen or heard from again. Then 6 years later, my grandpa died, and it wasn't until 6 months later that I was told that he had passed. So he had just vanished off the stage. I never had knowledge of it or was told that he had a funeral. I don't even know if he did. But again, he just vanished off the stage. But there was something else strange about our family when I was growing up. My brothers and sister and I used to refer to the family curse. Now that sounds like something you hear about in a story, right? I didn't know what a family curse was, but we just knew that there was something strange in the family. Now I realize, looking back, that it was a generational pattern of dysfunction where other families, might talk about things, work things out in conversation, get their feelings known to each other, share their emotions. None of that happened. Everything was like under the radar. Even, grandparents dying, it just disappeared and was never spoken of again. Now, I did hear that my grandpa had been a resident of a mental facility during some part of my childhood. And again, he disappeared off the radar for 6 months, and then all of a sudden he appeared. We were just told the word was a nervous breakdown. Now, who knows what that means? Okay. However, back then, something was going on emotionally, but it was kept completely under the radar, never talked about. But if anything strange happened, my siblings and I would just kind of chuckle and say, oh, that's the family curse. Now, it took me many decades to be able to discover what the family curse was. And it had nothing to do with werewolves or strings of garlic or, or things in a pot,
Or
So
even some corpse in the underground or something.
yes, like something in Macbeth. So it had nothing to do with that. But then I saw it as a pattern of dysfunction where emotional issues are never discussed. They're kept under the carpet. And then just like a bubbling cauldron, things will start to emerge over a period of time.
I understand. So that's sounds really restrictive and really like you also had to suppress a good deal of your personality,
Yeah.
essentially, because as I see you now, you're very joyful and sparkling and all that, and full of laughter. And so that is quite fascinating for me, how you then were able to unfold that, because as you said, you then, when you started your own life, then you married your husband, and it seems like that was maybe not exactly the same, but a, a little bit similar in insofar as you said you couldn't really express your feelings to him because he had this reaction that something is wrong with you and don't bother
Yes,
me.
exactly. And as you probably know, we usually seek out patterns that we understand at some subconscious level. And I certainly didn't know that when I was a young girl growing up, but I do remember feeling a sense of similarity when I met my first husband, because we had both grown up in, I would say, families of similar dysfunction. Everything was kept under the radar. But whereas in my family, it was disapproved of and not spoken of. In his family, they didn't talk about emotions, but they just yelled and screamed a lot.
Okay.
So nobody's discussing anything.
Right. Okay. So in your family you didn't express emotions, and in his family they did express them, but not process them in.
Yes, yes,
Ah,
there's no processing of them, and there's no give and take of trying to understand another different point of view. It was just like, whoa,
okay.
being hit with a mallet, you're wiped out. So that's how it was. So that continued for quite a long time. Now, since he was flying around the world, he was also eating the grass that was greener on the other side of the fence, if you understand that metaphor. And
Yeah.
so I didn't realize that he was unfaithful for quite a long time, although my daughters did know about that. And I just thought that you had to make the best of the situation. We were doing well. Okay, he had a good job. We had our mortgage paid. We had our food. We had, a vacation every year. So I thought, well, you just take the good with the bad, and that's just how life is. I had no knowledge that you could actually choose anything, because the feeling of this is how it is as a child, just assume that life goes form in a flat pattern, and you just have to take the good and the bad, for better or for worse, till death do you part. And I just thought, well, we had some good times at the beginning, so now we have to do the bad times.
Mm, okay. Yeah. So you had a decent standard of living, and he was providing for you, and there had been good times, and then you thought, okay, so there's good and bad in every situation, right? Yeah. I mean,
Exactly, right. So
uh,
that was my expectation. Just take the good with the bad, and keep on trudging on, one foot in front of the other.
so, and what happened then that as I understand it, you didn't stay forever with your husband because you aren't married to him anymore, right?
Correct. So what happened was, after 24 years, I was out on the patio one afternoon after work, because I was a teacher, and he came out on the patio, and he gave me a handful of papers, and he said, "Here, we're getting divorced." Well, you could have knocked me over with a feather, because I was in a state of shock. I couldn't believe this. As I said, we had the good times and the bad times, and we just, trudging along, trudging along. But this was a state of shock, because, as I say, I was raised till death do you part when you get married. Anyway, he said, "Oh, we're only going to have a trial situation and maybe we'll work it out. So this was very confusing to me. I never navigated much in the way of emotional feelings or processing these kind of tumultuous situations in my life. So I didn't really have any idea what to do. But one thing I did was I located a therapist, and husband said, we'll go to therapy, but he only went once and said all the problems were mine. So that was the end of that road. However, I did keep the therapist for myself as a means of emotional support because my family was still no earthly support. It took me 6 months before I could call them on the phone and say my husband has left because I knew that they were unsupportive. And that might have been something that prevented me from seeing the reality of the situation any earlier because I felt like I didn't have any options. You know, my family was 3,000 miles away. And even if they were in the next town, they weren't any emotional support. And when I called my father up, he said, well, do you feel guilty that he left? And this was a man that had been unfaithful multiple times throughout our lives together. And then when I called my sister, she said, well, if you had been a better wife, he wouldn't have left, you know, like I was supposed to be I Love Lucy or something, you know? So I realized that I was correct. There wasn't any support there. And I knew I needed a support system because I felt like I was crumbling, you know, all the pieces of my life were falling apart. So I discovered a divorce recovery group at a nearby church, and I went there. But my husband was telling me, oh, this is just going to be a trial separation and we'll get back together. We'll work it out. But then when he only went to therapy once and said all the problems were mine, I knew that that probably wasn't going to be happening. But I felt like a fish out of water because it was like, am I divorced? Am I separated? Or am I getting back together? It just, I couldn't get a grip on where I was in that time period. But then as time progressed, 6 months went by and I had been praying because God was still my anchor. And I knew that since he had helped me with my daughter when she was a newborn, he had brought somebody to take care of her when I was in the hospital. He was going to provide. So I had all my friends praying and I was praying, Lord, you know, help this marriage to get back together. After 6 months, I realized it wasn't happening. So there's something that in my mind, it just went click and another door opened. And I actually saw myself walking into the future, but it was through this fiery door. This was actually a vivid image in my mind because I knew I had to get through this awful time where I was crying every day on my way to work and so depressed because I didn't know what I was going to do to survive. And of course, I had 2 teenage daughters, and I didn't know how I was going to move on to the next part of my life. But then when I saw the door open, you know, it was like I heard a click, the door opened, and I knew I had to walk through the fire to get to the next ground in my life. And so I did. I remember driving to work every day saying, God, please help me to get through the day. And sometimes I would cry in my kindergarten class, but it was okay because when you're a kindergarten teacher, other kids cry too. So if I was crying at a story, that I would just say, oh, you know, that story really made me sad. You see,
the kids
but I was,
understand that.
yeah.
Probably also they're probably also rather supportive little kids, you
Yes,
know.
it was actually a very supportive thing, and it was very nurturing for me to be a kindergarten teacher for 20 years because I was very close to their emotional situation. See, because when you're little, you can cry at the drop of a hat. Somebody didn't like you, or you broke your pencil, or you lost your sandwich or something, you know, you can easily cry. So that was very therapeutic for me to be taking care of kids at that young age, when I was kind of taking care of that little girl inside me that never had that nurturing 40 years ago.
Yeah.
Just kind of interesting, you know?
Yeah, that's interesting. So would you say because you were in contact with little children every day, that you kind of opened up to your own inner child by that?
Yes, I would say that that is very accurate, because instead of being closed off like I was for the first 40 years where you couldn't express anything, here in kindergarten, everything's up for grabs. Everything is emotional, you see, and reading all the stories. And I used to incorporate all the different continents. When I taught my students, we would have like a month learning about Africa, and we would make posters and murals about all the animals and so forth. And then we would learn about India, and then we would learn about, the North American Indians and all these different cultures. So it was very therapeutic, because there's something that is very deep in humanity about these stories and myths and traditions that go through all of our cultures, right? And so that was a very healing thing.
Yeah, I see you have also this passion for other countries and
Yes,
the fauna and the flora and probably the
yes.
cultures and everything. As you said, you wanted to see the world, and so you married a pilot.
I did. However, when we were divorced, I thought, oh, I'll never travel again. But that wasn't to be, because my current husband and I have traveled quite a bit. We've been on 2 safaris to Africa, which I just loved, because it brought back to me those early days of teaching about all the animals when I was teaching kindergarten, and then we got to go to Australia, New Zealand, and Europe, and travel through the Rhine and the all the different countries of Europe. And so it was very satisfying for my traveling dream to be
Yeah.
realized.
Yes, I've seen that on your websites. It's that you really have. I think you have a number of how many countries you have traveled, something like 15 countries.
Yes,
But I find that interesting with the inner child and the little kids, and because my experience was, it's quite interesting. I had heard about the inner child and all that sort of things, and self-love and how to be nice to yourself and kind to yourself and all that, and I couldn't really relate to. I couldn't. I think I that's the kind of things you can understand intellectually, but you
yes,
don't make a relation to it emotionally until a few years ago. I think it's 7 years ago, when I suddenly had this memory of me as a child, and it was about a particular thing, and I suddenly saw myself kind of from the outside as this child, and I had a completely new reaction to myself. And as an adult, I looked at it and I thought, oh God, what a poor little thing, about myself. And I had never related to my inner
your
child, so to
own
speak, and
little girl, right? The
to my,
little
yes,
girl
before.
inside
And I personally, I think that that was possible only because of all the nephew and niece and all that that I got, and I had a relationship, and got sons and all that. So I had a relationship to, at that point, I had a relationship to children about the age or even smaller than I was back then. So somehow I think this, if you have this outside relationship with children, it actually gives you an opportunity to change something in your relationship with yourself, because it's kind of a different feeling that comes up there,
Yes,
right? And
yes.
now I'm interested in, how did you, now you told us about how it came about that you got divorced because your husband decided that
Here's the
that's it.
papers.
Surprise. um, um, And then I think it's probably been not just emotionally, probably also practically a challenging time with your two girls. And or how many girls did you have? How many
Two daughters.
children? Two.
Yes.
With your two daughters and taking care of them and of yourself and everything. And husband is gone, so to speak.
Right.
But I'm also interested in one, obviously, how did you manage to navigate it? And the other thing is that I'm wondering how you managed to get from all these really rough situations to evolve into this joyful human being I'm seeing here, because that's really something that comes across. I think that you're really you're radiating joy, and you're also telling the story in a way that is kind of like with a bit of humor, and so so how did you go from that point to here?
That's a good question. And you know what, Susanne? I was always a reader. I always read. Most of my summers were spent reading in the backyard under a tree. I remember reading about Florence Nightingale and Edith Clavell and the World Wars and all those things when I was little. And Heidi, you know, how she survived in Switzerland, that little girl, and all this. So besides my faith and having a therapist, I later sought another divorce recovery group, which was a big key in my I'd say survival and becoming a new person, because at this point now I was exposed to new ideas, and we were given books to read that were very, very important and instrumental in changing. So one of these books that I read was called Boundaries by Henry Cloud. Now, this was revolutionary when I read this book, because it started talking about boundaries as an emotional issue. But I thought boundaries was a fence between you and your neighbor. I had no concept that behavior or human relationships had anything to do with boundaries, because in my family of origin, whatever mom said went. It didn't matter what dad said. It didn't matter what the kids thought. You know, it was like the letter of the law was followed, and that was it. There wasn't any other boundaries. And then in my marriage, there was no boundaries either, because if I expressed myself, my husband would say I was having a nervous breakdown. And then I remembered, oh, wait a minute, when I was a child, my grandpa went away to a mental hospital and had a nervous breakdown. I don't even know what that is about, but just like whoosh, keep everything under the carpet, you see. But now that I was in this divorce recovery class, we were exposed to so many new ideas: boundaries, codependency, resilience, learning about crazy people, which were in our family. We called it the curse, but it's just dysfunction that you don't have another word to put on it until you read a book, and then you go, oh, that's what that person is called, you see?
Mm-hmm.
So I was learning so many things, and, you know, taking rapid notes about everything, because this was like opening a whole wide world of the emotions. And I always wondered, how could other women just cry at the drop of a hat? You know, they'd see a movie or they'd read a sad book and they'd cry. I was like, why are they doing that? You know, because my feelings were so locked up that it wasn't until my husband handed me the divorce papers that it finally cracked open in my heart. And then 40 years of tears came pouring out. But at that point, I realized I wasn't only crying because of the divorce, I was also crying for that little girl that was never heard, you see? So there was a long continuum. So then, as time went by, I developed 3 strategies, which I bring out in my book, Sow in Tears, Reap in Joy. Now, how I went about writing the book was back in COVID in 2020. Every night I would go through my journals that I had kept for decades, all the way back to childhood. And I was reading these stories of this little girl that was so sad, this teenager that was so sad, would come home from the dance and cry. And my mom would say, don't wear your heart on your sleeve. Well, I didn't know what that meant. I didn't have any confidence. I didn't have any easy ways of relating to the other kids. So I just felt like, the little match girl where nobody's going to talk to me and I only had two friends, that kind of thing. So through all this, I was able to look at the journals, recognize that little girl and what she'd gone through. Then I was able to look at the journals of when I was married and how sad I was and how I couldn't express my feelings and all. Then I was thinking, wow, I know my mother was depressed in her life. She had had a difficult childhood during the Depression, and her father, which was my grandfather, had escaped from Poland in the 1900s with just the clothes on his back because there was a lot of political oppression, as you know, back in those days. And so then I saw that this cycle of not being able to express yourself had a long history. So my mother didn't have any nurturing. My grandpa didn't have any nurturing. So when it got to me, they did the best they could. They fed me, took me to school, gave me music lessons, etc. But they didn't know anything about the emotional part because they had never experienced it. You see? And I remember when I had grown up, I saw that my mother was depressed and I suggested that she go to see a therapist. Well, she got so angry. She didn't talk to me for 6 months. So that just shows you what a taboo it was to bring up any kind of emotional issues. You see, it was just flat under the carpet and never a word was said. But I didn't want that for myself. So I kept on working on the therapy, the divorce recovery group, reading all these books and taking notes to learn about what I had never learned in the first 40 years of life. You see? So it was like breaking open a whole big eggshell of another world. There's feelings. You're allowed to be sad about things. You're allowed to have different thoughts and different emotions from the other people around you. See, this was not my experience. Everything was like, don't talk, don't ask, and we won't tell you. That's how it was. So then when I had cracked the shell open, the shell was way cracked open now. All these pieces started flying out, and I was able to explore the other part of life, which is being a human being. And I remember when I was growing up, I hated to be human. I would touch everything in my room, make sure it was all perfect before I left the room. You know what I mean? If I'd make a mistake as an adult, I would berate myself because like, oh, I'm so sick. I did that. I couldn't even have any compassion on myself. But those were all things I had to learn in my journey. But then when I was writing my book, I said to myself, well, this isn't just my journey, because as I say, I saw the thread of dysfunction that went back 2 generations, and who knows how much farther back it goes. But I realized that we all have journeys of some type. So I wanted to lead the reader with tools that they could access for whatever downturns one's life is in, right? Because everybody has downturns, either health or finances or their job or their relationships. Something is not going to be perfect. So then I came up with the 3 pillars. I call it the IOUs of survival. Looking in, that's the I, because I knew I had to figure out what had gone wrong in my life. You see, I had to read all these books to discover new things that I was lacking so that I could get some new skills. So that's the looking in. And then through the therapy and the divorce recovery, that also was reflective, but sharing with other peers that were in a supportive environment, you see. And then I had to look out because I knew I needed support. My family wasn't any support. either back then or as an adult when I was divorced. So I needed to get some groups around me for social support. You see,
Mhm.
we all need that. I look for physical groups, working out, hiking groups, biking groups, and so forth, as well as, the therapy and the divorce recovery, Bible study, people that would come around me and not be judgmental, like, well, you should have been a better wife, or don't you feel guilty that he left? Because who needs that, right? And then I also had to look up because I knew God had a plan for all of us, and that no matter what our journey, we have to keep on going. Sometimes we fall off a cliff, but then we find the stamina to climb back up again. So that's why I call it the IOUs of survival: looking in, looking out, and looking up for guidance.
I would like to know if you could describe a bit more this faith you had developed when someone showed up to take care of your daughter, and which then helped you in this time of huge change when your divorce was going and you had to build a new life essentially for yourself. Could you describe a bit how that felt to you, so we can grasp a bit better how helpful that was?
Mhm. Certainly. Well, I was raised as a Catholic, so I had the basics, but I never felt like God was very close to me. I knew he was out there somewhere,
Mhm.
but it wasn't until I prayed so hard when I was sick as a new mom, and then God answered my prayer by bringing this military wife, and it was such a shocking experience that then I knew that God had a plan. Now, during the ups and downs of my marriage, I still thought I had to trudge on forever and keep one foot in front of the other, but still I knew that God had a plan. I didn't know what it was. But when my husband left and I prayed, God, help me to put this thing back together, and it wasn't happening, I had the knowledge inside that God, created the universe. He had a plan for everybody, and nothing happens by accident. We have things that happen in our life that are lessons for us. They're learning points, they're turning points, you see. So when I realized that God had a plan for me, and there's a phrase in the Bible from the Old Testament, it says, I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord, the plans to prosper you and not to harm you, the plans for hope and a future. Now, that's a phrase from the Old Testament, but it was something in the back of my mind that I learned, and I knew that it was true, you see. And then when I walked through that imaginary door into my future,
It's such a powerful image.
yes, it was. And I could even see the fire around it because I was used to hiding my feelings all my life. But now I had the very certain knowledge that I had to feel the pain. I was feeling the pain of that
Mhm.
child that was so sad and lonely and
Yeah.
unheard. I was feeling the pain of that divorcee that thought she was married till death do you part. And now all of a sudden, here's the papers. And now I have to scramble for a new life, you see? So feeling all those pains, and I didn't want to dull it. And I know some people dull pain with alcohol or drugs or, addictions of all different kinds. But I had already had my pain dulled for 40 years. Now, when I saw that fiery door and I knew I had to walk through it to feel the pain, but I knew I wasn't going to be wiped out by it. I knew I was moving through it, you see? So that's the difference. I knew
So
I
that's
wasn't. Go on.
so that's kind of a deeper knowledge. I mean, it sounds like you had kind of an epiphany moment, like you suddenly understood
Yes.
that you have to move through that, and it doesn't help to push it down and suppress it. But also this confidence that you will survive it. It's not. I think that mostly when we avoid emotions, it's because of fear,
Yeah.
obviously. that we
Yes.
can't handle it or something. So,
Mhm.
but you had this confidence. So you had this insight, and you also had the confidence that it will all work out somehow, right? So,
Yes,
and
it's true.
that's, I mean, that's really interesting, because I think that may be related to this experience you had, and that you just had this faith that it's a kind of, it's all going to be okay somehow.
Yes,
You know,
it's true.
it's
It's true.
you're
Yeah.
you're you're held. You're
Yes,
held.
I was held in God's hands. That's the truth. That's the truth.
I was digging into that because I had a very interesting experience a little bit over a year ago myself, and I'm always trying to recall that feeling because it was so beautiful, which was in a meditative state, and I had a feeling, an incredible feeling of all is well and all is taken care of and nothing can go wrong. And for a moment, it was really a fraction of a second. I think it was really short, but it was extremely powerful. And during this moment, I realized that I could not relate to the feeling of worrying about anything
Wow.
for a moment. So, and I think this sort of experiences, when we have them, they can really help us to go through challenges if we are able to recall them.
Yes. And I think,
Yeah.
Mhm. I was just going to say, I think we have to anchor ourselves on these things because, like I said, I know God has a plan. And I remember the phrase in the Bible, I have a plan for you, said the Lord, to prosper you and not to harm you, to give
Yeah.
you hope in a future. See, so there's words like this that are in the Bible that we can look to, that people have looked to for thousands of years through all kinds of trials. But it's the looking up part of the journey that keeps us going, even though we still have to go through all the potholes.
Yeah, and I think it's all about building some sort of trust. And I think it's when you are a thinker, it's really not easy to get there, because you can see all the world all around you and what's happening to people and to the world as a whole, and then it's not so easy to develop this trust. But as I understand it, you kind of had this trust, and that's something that can carry you through. And I really love the title of your book, this "Sow in Tears and Reap in Joy," because it I think, I don't know how you found it, but yeah, show it a bit to the camera. So this is available on Amazon. I'm sure going to buy that and read it, because I'm really interested. And I think that captures what you have told us about your story. That this title captures it so perfectly, you know.
Yes.
And yeah, I love that. So anyone who is interested, I think we are going to put a link to the book in the description
Yes. And
when
you
we
know
publish
what?
it.
Several years ago, Susanne, before I ever wrote the book, I went to a little craft fair at Christmas time, and they had arts and crafts and ornaments and soap and all these things. And I found an artist had a table. She had a painting with this picture that
Mhm.
she had painted. And on the painting, she had written, I am enough. Well, when I saw that, I just burst into tears at this craft fair. And I bought the painting, and then I just kept it on my shelf. I Xeroxed it and sent a copy to my girls and my sister, but I just kind of kept it. So then a couple years later, when I was trying to figure out how to write my memoir, I was in a Zoom group with other authors, and we were like brainstorming about how you get the title for your book and so forth. And I described a little bit about my journey, you know, from the childhood through the divorce and now into a new life. And one of the members of our group, who was a Christian, said, why
Yeah,
don't you call it Sow in Tears, Reap in Joy? So it was like, ah, that's
yeah,
it. That's the
yeah. It
perfect.
also It also has this biblical ring to it, so it's I
Yeah,
think it's really the perfect title.
it does. It does have a perfect title, and but it's so descriptive.
And the
So
beauty, yeah.
I found a local artist to repaint it for me. So I didn't know
Okay.
who the artist was, but I didn't want to use her exact image. But I think it captures the poignancy that I
Yeah.
felt as a little girl, and that sad little girl was still carried on into the divorced wife, you know.
Yes. 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 I think it's absolutely perfect. So yeah. So
Mhm.
anyone who is interested will find the link in the description, or just
On
go
Amazon.
to Amazon and search for "So in Tears,
And it's
Reap in Joy."
also on my website.
Okay. Yes.
susiemierzwik.com has all my books and links where they can.
Right. Yes. There's
Purchase.
the collection of your books. Right. So, Susie, after all this, after you had gone through all this and embarked on a new life and broke free, let's say, from the constrictions you had been living in, you then also, I think, before you retired, right?
Yes,
But close shortly before, a few years before you retired, you then found something that then created a new business for yourself, which you are running now.
yes,
And maybe tell us a bit about your experience with that and what it is about exactly. We have mentioned it before, but
yes.
I leave it to you to tell the story and explain it.
Okay, thank you, Suzanne. So anyway, I was a teacher and I actually taught for 26 years. But at one point, it was almost the 20th year of my tenure at this one school where I was a kindergarten teacher. And I realized that I had to retire because my boss was very punitive and she had it in for me. So I remembered my lessons that I had learned as a young woman when I worked in corporate and finance. And the vice president said to me, if your boss doesn't like you, you have to go. So I saw the writing on the wall. And this was fortunate because I had 20 years tenure in this position. So I was able to cash that in for a golden parachute and retire early. But in the meantime, I had been suffering with severe hand pain for many years and decades of allergies with medications. So a woman came to my classroom in 2009 and she said, Susie, what's wrong with your hands? I had had both of her sons and her nephews and lots of others over the years. And so I said, oh, I've got arthritis, and they just give me medication. It doesn't do any good. She says, well, you got to try this little anti-aging patch and see what it'll do for you. So I thought about it for a few days and I thought, well, I've taken decades of allergy medicine, decades of pain medicine, nothing of it works. So let me try this little anti-aging patch. So I tried it. For a couple of days, I didn't notice much, but after a month, my hands went from this to this. All the pain and suffering and cramping of my hands went away. And I realized I had no allergy symptoms for the first time in 30 years. So now I was blown away. I said, oh my God, this is a new opportunity. So I knew I was retiring in 2012. I said, God, what do you want me to do? And the answer was clear. I was rid of my pain and my allergies, so I decided I would go forth and help other people get rid of their pain and chronic conditions. So that's what I've been doing part-time since 2009 and then full-time when I retired. And it's been a source of great joy because I have the opportunity to change people's health. Now, let me explain something that is so simple. I went into a coffee shop and the lady that I was supposed to meet, her face was all blown up and her lips were all distended. And I said, wow, what happened to you? She said, oh, I went to the dentist and they gave me some medication and now my face is like this. I have to go to the emergency room after our meeting. She was gracious enough to show up before the emergency room. And I said, oh my God, you're having an allergic reaction. You need this little patch, the glutathione patch that I had used years ago. So I gave her the patch to put on along with a bottle of water, and we had our conversation. In 30 minutes, her face stopped swelling and went down to normal. And she said, I don't need to go to the emergency room anymore. She became a client. Another lady that I met through networking, she had severe sciatica pain. I said, oh my God, you need to try this patch. She tried it on her sciatica. Now she was able to work every day without any pain and no medication. Another lady had plantar fasciitis, very painful condition of the feet. I said, you got to try this patch. You're going to love it. She does, takes it away. Another colleague was recovering from cancer, young woman. She had a baby and she just was wiped out from the chemo. I said, you've got to try these patches. She does. In 6 months, she recovers, gets her energy back, and the next year she has a healthy baby. So many people are able to change the trajectory of their life because of some technology that I introduced them to.
So that's impressive stories. Yeah, so that's essentially what you are telling people about now, based on your own experience. And yeah, everyone who is interested in checking that out, there is a link from your website, and yeah, you can just click there, and it will take you to your language website and check out what is written there and what they say about it, and if it is for you, right?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much, Susie. That was an interesting and really inspiring interview, and I'm really happy that we have brought that to our viewers, and also the 3 pillars you've shared for how to move through big challenges and issues. And I think you have more practical advice in your book. And yeah, fascinating story. And I'm really impressed about how you have evolved, so to speak. I'm impressed by the person I'm talking to after hearing this story that goes over decades of your life, you know. And so I think this is really encouraging and helpful for people who find themselves in situations where they might think, okay, I'm this old and situation is this bad, and how is this ever going to work? And you can see it can work out, and you can move through it. And yeah, just don't give up. And yeah, hope you got something out of this interview. And Susie, thank you very much for coming on and for sharing your story with us.
Thank you, Susanne. It was a pleasure talking to me and being on your platform. And listeners, remember, you can always look in, look out, and look up for support, because nothing is hopeless. You can always take one little step.